Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here and share some perspectives about private market investing in that next decade. And I want to start with one big question, which is, what is the real game changer in this new environment, in this brave new world ahead of us? Is it a macro environment, which is very different? Is it geopolitics, supply chain management, things like that? Or is it labor dynamics? Or is it the next generation of technology? And our answer is very clear. It's none of the first three. Why is that? They're very important, don't get me wrong. You have to build your businesses very carefully around these factors. But what they have in common is that none of them is changing business models in a fundamental way. And that's very different from the next generation of technology. That will lead to a reconfiguration of winning business models and a redistribution of profit pools. So let me talk about that. I will do this in two steps. One is talking about how we see that next generation and economic transformation unfolding, and then I will take a step back and look at what's the bigger picture of what's actually happening here. If you talk about economic transformation, what I think is very key is to keep in mind is that these things happen faster and faster. We've seen this on and on, with industrialization taking 100 years, 30 years for the service industry, 25 years from 98 to 23 for the first digital integration of processes and systems. And we have the view that we see the next digital integration towards autonomy is happening in 10 to 15 years. And the reason is very simple, because technology adoption, as you see on the right-hand side here, is just happening faster and faster. So how should we think about this world? And of course, no one has the crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going on. But it's helpful to have a certain structure and have a certain hypothesis. So what we use is what we call an economic business transformation model. That's our internal model. That's built on an observation that every economic transformation follows a very similar pattern where typically two forces come together. In the first digital integration, this was internet, affordable computation power, leading to information as a service, and then unfolding the change in several waves. And we see something very similar happening today with AI as infrastructure, massive computation power. Together, this brings us intelligence as a service with, again, several waves that will affect the businesses. The first wave is something that's happening today that's actually not that spectacular. We call this business process transformation. It's all kind of co-pilots that make you just work more effectively, like, for instance, in supply chain analytics, things like that. The bigger deal is what's happening next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, okay? That's what we call business performance transformation. This is towards autonomy. That's when these co-pilots become so effective, you can use them as agents, okay? You can replace end-to-end processes, for instance, like ADNOC here in Abu Dhabi does with some of their production and simulation activities. We have a very similar business in our portfolio that provides for digital software twin for utility networks. So that's much more key, because if you don't adapt to these models, the business is probably going to away. But the big deal is actually not that. The big deal is what is ahead of us in the third wave. That's business model transformation. And business model transformation is not another incremental step. That's when usually forces come together. Often this is driven by novel scientific methodologies that drive completely new ways of building businesses or products. There's not a whole lot we see today, because a lot of that will probably happen in the 30s, 35. But what we see in certain areas is quite mind-boggling. So for instance, if you look at material science, okay, could be in organic or inorganic material science, where these models have become extremely strong. We have seen the first anti-aging peptide developed by such a model last year. You can buy it in a shop now. We have a portfolio business, Fair Journey, that develop antibodies using that technology. This is a much bigger deal, because that completely changes the engineering from in vitro to in silico. It will change the trials, but even the distribution at the end of that value chain. So the whole pharmaceutical supply chain completely changes the next 10 years. The way we think about, or have to think about, these business model transformations is that there is an incredible amount of innovation going on, okay? Think about that. There were about 5 million scientists about 20 years ago in the first digital integration. About 10 million maybe 5 years ago. They use all AI and tools probably in a more effective way than even software engineers. Often I hear from my school, it's 5 times, 6, 7 times efficiency factors. So think of it as not 5 million scientists, but we have the output of 50, 60 million scientists in the next 10 years. It's a tsunami of innovation where the shock waves of innovation, they often travel beyond the surface, below the surface of the water. You don't see them. You only see them once they hit the ecosystems, and then they will radically change these ecosystems. So in investing in these days, you need to think about the short-term margin enhancements through the process support. You need to think about the bigger deal on the actual performance transformation. But what you always have to keep in mind is where's the actual business model transformation coming from in your ecosystem. If you take a step back and if you wonder, I mean, what's the bigger picture actually here, what's happening in this next transformation of the economy? If you look at some of these headlines, what they have in common is three things. You see a lot of tech-enabled, cross-sectors, new leaders that define new ecosystems. And the question is that only happening at the bigger scale of some of these large companies? And the answer is clearly no. What we're doing in our portfolio is exactly building this next generation tech-led cross-sector champions in all kinds of ecosystems. So give a few examples here. We see healthcare, service, and technology come together. Confluent is a large physiotherapy platform in our portfolio. They bring together the physical and the digital experience for physiotherapy. You see it in pharmaceutics. I gave one example already. You see this in the trials in the whole value chain. We see it in agriculture, where data and technology is coming together. So a business like Rovensa, we bought that as a fertilizer business a few years back. We're moving into a biosolutions technology company. In a very similar way, you see manufacturing and software coming together. And software, by the way, will be much more relevant for most of the goods, especially if you think about robotics, where you see every few months an update, and the update will be driven by software and not necessarily by technology. Very similar on the infrastructure services side. We have a company called Rosen, very active in this region here. They do pipeline inspection. They send robots through pipelines while the oil, the gas is flowing. They take electromagnetic resonance pictures, a couple of billion. They use AI to actually look for cracks and corrosion, things like that. Is this infrastructure? Is it services? Is it technology? I don't know. But relevant is that's a relevant ecosystem. And of course, you have a lot of examples in computation, services, energy, specifically here in Abu Dhabi. So where does this leave us as an investor and as a builder of businesses in this new area? You have to have a very deliberate approach to what we call transformational investing. You need to think about ecosystems and value chains and not sectors. Sectors is a thing of the past. And you need to think about the margins that you can derive in the first few years, but then you need to very hardly think about what's the winning business model in these systems in 5 to 10 years ahead. And you do this with these cross-sector teams. You do this with very active operators from the businesses, not advisors that spend a lot of time. You need a very large team, a cross-sector team for that. And for every business, there's just no exception. The IT, the data, the technology strategy is incredibly strategic. So what I want to leave with you today is that there's a lot going on with geopolitics, maybe a new macro environment with a little bit of lower base growth in many, many areas or regions of the world. There's a lot going on in terms of labor dynamics in many places, in Europe, in Asia specifically. But the big game changer is the next generation of technology. You need to be very deliberate because it's about building these tech-enabled cross-sector leaders that will define this new economy and the new ecosystems with a very active team in a very transformational way. No better place to talk about that than Abu Dhabi, because this is really one of the places where exactly that future is being built. Thank you.